The first time he felt the grass between his fingers, he laughed like it was the most dangerous joke the world had ever played on him. He laughed because laughter was roomy and safe, and because the garden at the edge of the Hale estate was huge enough to hide a lifetime of secrets. He laughed, and the laugh stuck to his ribs, and the wind carried it away. He had been born with a silence in his legs the doctors couldn't name and the specialists could only surround with polite terms. They held conferences in glass rooms and wrote careful phrases into folders that tasted like cotton. They fitted him with tools, adjusted angles, mapped nerves with ink and frown. They told his father that modern medicine could do many things, and they said the same quiet sentence that every rich man hates to hear: there are limitations. The father bought solutions in comfortable abundance. He bought machines that hummed and pulsed in blue light, therapists with perfect degrees, and contraptions that promised incremental motion. He bought a wing of the hospital for his son, a suite with floor-to-ceiling windows so the boy could watch a world that moved without permission. He bought silence from pitying faces. He bought a schedule of exercises and names of doctors and the illusion of control. He did not buy the way the boy's eyes could turn toward the street and fill up with stories he had never been allowed to act out. The boy, who everyone called Ethan because it felt tidy to pin a label, learned the world through the small window of a wheelchair. He learned the vocabulary of ceilings and dust motes and the exact trajectory of a sparrow in the courtyard. He learned boredom like a new language, and he kept words for things he couldn't say: wish, why, please. Sometimes he mouthed them to the humming machines and watched the machines blink back and not understand. There were faces that came and went. Therapists with neat hair and patient smiles who taught him to pick up pencils and balance tiny balls between his palms. They applauded gently when he managed to sit without toppling, as if the gesture were the final act in a play they'd been rehearsing for months. They took numbers and progress notes. The father marked small victories with stern nods and a check in the ledger of achievements. The mother lived in memory and in hallway photographs. She moved through the house in photographs, and the boy loved the light in those photos like a secret. Outside the gate, life had a different rhythm. It moved in rents, in the scrape of hands on metal, in the barter of songs for coins. There were people who made do with fewer guarantees and more courage. There was a girl who could balance a tray, a song, and a stolen orange at the same time and still make it look like art. Her name, to the people who sometimes bought coffee and sometimes shared bread with her, was Maya. To the city she belonged in a chorus of voices that the tall buildings softened into echoes. She was small and quick, with hands that knew how to warm themselves around a mug and curtains that never fully closed. She slept where she could rest and painted the world with laugh lines and reckless generosity. Maya performed on a corner where children learned to count by clapping along. She danced with a carrier bag and a broken tambourine. She sang lines she had heard in bus stations, hummed lullabies she could have stolen from 1,000 mothers, and smiled in a way that made strangers feel less like strangers. Ethan met her the way boys meet stars, through an accidental window. He watched her from his garden, the wheelchair parked at the fringe where the glass met the grass. He watched while she turned a simple coin into a small triumphant song that made the children giggle and the old men drop their heads and smile, because the song remembered them. He watched the way her body moved with rhythm, how her feet tapped the pavement like a secret promise. "Do you ever teach?" he asked one afternoon when the decision to speak surprised him, dropping between them like a pebble in a pond. She looked up and misread him at first as another patron, another coin to be won with a flourish. But there was no jewel of pity in his eyes. There was only curiosity and the wide, dangerous hunger of someone who had been limited by certainty for so long that anything new felt enormous. She sat on the curb and brushed dust from her jeans and listened. "I teach what I have," she said. "I teach dancing with one shoe and singing out of tune. Does that count?" "It counts to me," he said. It was a small exchange that would not have shifted the axis of the world, except that small exchanges sometimes hide earthquakes. The boy began to wait for Maya. He would mark the tiles of the courtyard as if they were footsteps on a map he planned to walk one day. He would bring a toy to the window and hold it up like a flag. She noticed this. She noticed the way he traced the trajectory of sparrows and the way his palms clenched at sudden noises. She started staying a little longer. One day she flattened a crumpled flyer on the window and held it up, an advertisement for a community class. His father said no when he learned how Maya made a living on the curb. The father measured the gaps between ranks, and the math made him suspicious. He did not want a street performer shaping the boy's schedule, but the boy had a different kind of persuasive currency. "I can try," he told his father with a stubborn smile. The father pretended to consider and then authorized a meeting. He liked the drama of bringing order to chaos. He watched as the girl arrived at the house, clothes washed and patched, smiling as if she were auditioning for a role in a world that did not expect her to be anything but brave. "She can come for 2 weeks," the father said. "No promises. She will follow the program." Maya nodded and stepped into a mansion that took its breath back at the audacity of all that space. She laughed once and counted the chandeliers by finger, as if counting extravagant things were a kind of magic trick. The boy watched her cross the marble and felt a new kind of electricity, not the medical kind, but the human current that flows when someone else sees you. She started simply. She moved around him like a comet, slow and careful and brilliant. She did not touch what the therapists had taught. She added a new language of movement, rhythm. She tapped beats with spoons and coaxed his palms to clap along. She draped scarves over his knees and taught him to imagine his legs were clouds ready to drift. She created games where standing was a treasure hunt and the prize was a secret handshake. At first, the therapists scoffed at the informality. They kept meticulous charts that showed 5% improvement in muscle tone and advised rest. But Ethan began to mimic the rhythm. His shoulders swayed to beats Maya hammered on the table. He learned to transfer weight a finger's breadth at a time because she turned weight shifts into a story about crossing a bridge. He learned to try because trying had been turned from a chore into play. She taught him to breathe into the sound. She made him laugh until he coughed, and then told him to hold that laughter like a ladder. The boy's legs did not suddenly appoint themselves to motion. Progress was thin and measured in increments. A millimeter, a smile, a night without crying. But his eyes widened with each small impossible thing, and his father began to notice something else looking back at him: hope. It was not only the boy who changed. The father, who had spent a fortune bargaining with fate, watched the way Maya refused to see limitation as the last word. She did not carry diplomas. She carried a worn pair of sneakers and the smell of rain. She had no certifications, but she had a stubbornness like a bright nail hammered into the world. One evening, a storm rolled across the city in a manner that felt almost scripted. The wind found the Hale estate as if it were a stage and rearranged the leaves in dramatic swirls. The lights flickered. The boy sat near the wide window and watched the rain write itself onto the glass. Maya sat beside him and traced the way the water slid, drawing imaginary rivers. "What does it feel like?" he asked. "Like being brave when you're wet," she said. He laughed, and the sound bounced off the high ceilings, small and surprised. The house felt too big for one laugh, so it made room for more. He wanted to stand, not because someone had told him it was a goal, but because he had decided he wanted to feel his knees remember their names. They began to work with the rain as if it were a partner. Maya cranked up an old radio and found a song that had a steady drum. They practiced stepping in rhythm with the beat. She helped him wedge his feet against cushions, then against the floor, then against the wooden step that led to the garden. Each attempt was a negotiation between muscle and will, between fear and the soft insistence of a girl's voice that said, "Keep going. Don't look at the top," she urged. "Look at the next beat. Just the next beat." He learned to live in beats. He learned that motion could be summoned like a spell. One beat, another beat, a slow climb. The father watched in the doorway, warily, as if any demonstration might be a con. He had paid for progress before, measured it, and then watched it recede like a tide. But in the smallness of the room, as rain made velvet shadows along the walls, he finally saw something honest and stubborn. There was a night when the heater failed and the house hummed with cold. The boy shivered but refused to retreat. They sat close on a blanket, and Maya told him about a time she had danced with broken shoes and still made it through the night. She told him that courage sometimes comes wrapped in a sweater you borrowed from a stranger. He listened, and then, between the story and the comfort, he did what children do when they are fed on possibility. He tried again. This time, the attempt was not about therapy. It was about a dare. He pulled with the small heave he had practiced 1,000 times. His muscles trembled. The wheelchair, patient and obedient, waited. The pillows made a soft barricade. Maya held onto his hand like an anchor. The room shrank to the size of a heartbeat. One beat. Another beat. The boy shifted his weight as if moving sand in a glass. His foot scraped the floor, and the scrape sounded like a sentence. He gulped a laugh, and the sound became a bridge. The first rise was a small betrayal of habit. It surprised everyone by its courage. He stumbled, then steadied. His legs remembered something old and true. He stood. The sound that left the father was not a word. It was a small breaking of disbelief, a noise like a window opening. The house, which had held breath for so long, exhaled. The mother, who lived in photographs and whose laugh seemed to know exactly when to stop, appeared in the father's face like a memory returned. He stepped forward, hand reaching out with an awkward love, and for the first time he matched the boy's vulnerability with a presence that was not calculated. It did not stop there, because life cannot be condensed into a single frame like a photograph. The boy's standing was a beginning and a cliff and a promise all at once. He took a wobbly step, then another. He leaned into Maya's rhythm, into steps that felt like sound. Each small movement was a defiance of the ledger, of the cold arithmetic of prognosis. The therapists, present with their charts, could only watch the arithmetic change into poetry. A neighbor who had come by with a tray of soup stood in the doorway and wept quietly. Staff who had seen the boy's routine for years pressed palms together as if in worship. The father, whose suit had always been armor against weakness, knelt on the floor with a hand on his son's shoulder and let the armor slip for a moment. "Walk to me," he said, which was less an order and more a plea. The boy looked at his father and then at Maya. The choice was sudden and simple. He laughed, the same laugh that had learned the shadows of the courtyard, and stepped. When he took his first careful, deliberate steps across the room, the world made room for itself to feel again. The rain outside slowed, as if to listen. The clock in the hallway seemed to rearrange its ticking to a more human tempo. People who had been living with the idea of permanent limitation sat with their mouths open and learned a little about how miracles sometimes prefer to arrive dressed as stubbornness and companionship. In the days that followed, there were disappointments and triumphs braided together. He fell and learned to stand again. He practiced with crutches and with a gait trainer and with the patient boredom of repetition. The father began to learn the grammar of apologies without speaking them aloud. He learned to notice and to ask and to be present. He sat in rooms with doctors and realized that money could not buy everything, and that some things required time and laughter and the courage to be vulnerable. Maya did not stay to be upgraded into a professional or to wear a title. She became what she had always been, a girl who could turn a coin into a chorus and a sidewalk into a stage. She danced in the courtyard and sometimes in the house when the boy wanted to practice. She left gifts of small things, a pebble that matched a story, a song caught between her teeth. The father offered to set her up with lessons, housing, a job with benefits. She accepted some offers and refused others the way someone chooses which colors to keep. He taught himself to walk because someone taught him to try, and because someone else taught him that the beat of a song can be stronger than the certainty of a diagnosis. The world did not change its rules. It merely expanded to include a new pair of feet that wanted to learn the road. On a bright morning, with the garden smelling of cut grass and possibility, Ethan walked to the gate. He walked like a person who had practiced falling and getting up 1,000 times, and then found the courage to do it without an audience. Maya stood at the curb with her tambourine and shoes that had seen too many streets. She smiled as if nothing were more ordinary, and yet everything was extraordinary. He stopped and took her hand, and he said, simply, "Thank you." She squeezed back and, with a grin that seemed to carry the whole city, she said, "You did it." The father watched from the doorway, and something in him softened into something that resembled gratitude. It was not the kind of transaction he liked. It could not be tallied in columns. It was a debt of human kindness, and the only way to pay it forward was to stop pretending that control was the same as love. The boy who had once watched sparrows from a window now chased them across the lawn. He fell sometimes and got back up, and the sound he made when he laughed carried across the property and into the street where, for a second, people stopped and looked a little longer at the possibility that the world could be kinder than it had been taught to be. And Maya, who had always been a lesson in improvisation, walked away with a pocket full of coins and a head full of new songs. knowing that she had done something unbelievable. She had taught someone to believe in the music of his own feet.